this filthy palace maid out of my graduation celebration!
The hall fell silent. Hundreds of distinguished guests turned toward the young woman standing at the entrance, still wearing the faded servant's uniform she had rushed over in after hearing only an hour earlier that her younger sister was graduating from the Royal Ladies' Academy. Her face lit up with a hopeful smile.
Lily, I made it!
Instead of smiling back, Lady Lily's expression turned cold.
Who allowed this woman inside?
The graduates exchanged confused glances. Parents whispered among themselves. A professor frowned. Lily took a step back as if Amelia carried a terrible disease. Then she pointed toward the door.
I've never seen this woman before in my life.
Amelia's heart shattered. Before she could speak, Rose, the youngest sister she had raised like a daughter, looked directly into her eyes and quietly said,
"Please leave. You're embarrassing us."
The palace guards seized Amelia by both arms. As they dragged her across the polished floor, no one in that grand hall knew the truth. That the same woman they were throwing out had spent 15 years waking before sunrise, scrubbing palace floors until her hands bled, skipping meals, selling every precious thing their parents had left behind, and burying her own dream of becoming a seamstress so the two young women now denying her could stand proudly on that graduation stage. Everyone believed they were removing an unwanted servant. Only one person wasn't convinced, the Duke Adrian Blackwood, because he noticed something no one else did. As Amelia disappeared through the doors, tears streaming down her face, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Congratulations, my little sisters." The Duke's expression changed instantly. Little sisters? If that palace maid was telling the truth, then one of the kingdom's brightest graduates had just committed the cruelest betrayal he had ever witnessed. Welcome to the channel, where every story reminds us that true nobility is measured by the heart, not by a title. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if you enjoy stories filled with sacrifice, justice, and unforgettable endings, please consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Now, let's return to the heartbreaking promise that began 15 years before this unforgettable day. The kingdom of Ashmore was a land where birth determined destiny. Marble palaces towered over the capital, their golden spires glittering beneath the morning sun, while servants hurried through narrow back passages, carrying baskets of fresh bread, polished silver trays, and bundles of firewood before the nobles awoke. Wealth and privilege belonged to those born into noble blood. Everyone else survived by serving them. Among those servants was Thomas Ashcroft, a humble stablemaster whose hands had spent 26 years grooming royal horses before dawn and caring for them long after sunset. Every groom respected him, every guard greeted him warmly, and every palace worker knew he was a man whose honesty could never be questioned. Though his clothes were always dusted with hay and leather polish, Thomas carried himself with quiet dignity. His greatest treasure was never found inside the royal stables. It was the little cottage waiting for him at the edge of the capital, where his wife Eleanor and their 3 daughters filled the tiny home with warmth, despite owning very little. Amelia, the eldest, at 19, had inherited her mother's gentle heart. Lily, 18, possessed a quick mind and endless curiosity, while 17-year-old Rose had a cheerful spirit that could brighten even the darkest evenings. Their dinners were simple: fresh vegetable stew, homemade bread, and occasionally roasted chicken when Thomas received extra wages, but laughter was always plentiful around the small oak table. Everything changed on a cold autumn afternoon. The young prince's carriage had barely entered the palace courtyard when one of the royal horses became terrified by a loud crack of thunder. The frightened animal reared violently, breaking free from its harness before charging directly toward the prince. Without thinking, Thomas ran. Palace guards shouted. Servants screamed. The prince froze in terror. Thomas threw himself between the runaway horse and the terrified child, pushing the prince out of harm's way. The carriage overturned with tremendous force. By the time the chaos settled, Thomas Ashcroft lay motionless beneath the shattered wooden wheels. The prince survived. Thomas did not. For several days the palace praised his courage. His funeral was attended by royal officials, servants, and stable workers. Fine words were spoken about honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. Then life inside the palace continued as though nothing had happened. Within a week, another stablemaster had taken Thomas's place. Back inside the little cottage, silence replaced laughter. Eleanor never recovered from losing her husband. Grief settled over her like a heavy winter fog. She ate very little, coughed through sleepless nights, and grew weaker with each passing week. One evening, Amelia found her mother struggling to breathe. Lily hurried to fetch water. Rose knelt beside the bed, clutching Eleanor's trembling hand. Eleanor looked at Amelia with tears filling her tired eyes. "Come closer." Amelia leaned down. Her mother gently squeezed her hand. "I won't be here much longer." "Please don't say that," Amelia whispered, already crying. Eleanor managed a faint smile. "You've always been the strongest." She looked toward Lily and Rose. "They'll still need someone." Amelia's tears flowed freely. "I know. No matter what happens," Eleanor whispered with the last of her strength, "promise me you won't let anyone separate this family." Amelia pressed both hands around her mother's. "I promise. I'll protect them. I'll never leave them." Only then did Eleanor close her eyes for the final time. Within a single month, the Ashcroft sisters had buried both parents. 3 days later, another tragedy arrived. Their landlord knocked heavily on the cottage door.
"I'm sorry. The rent hasn't been paid for 2 months.
Please, sir, I'll find work. I'll pay everything.
The property owner has already found another tenant."
By sunset, the sisters' few belongings had been placed outside the cottage. Amelia carried a worn suitcase. Rose hugged the family blanket. Lily silently wiped away tears as the door closed behind them forever. Their only remaining hope was Amelia's aunt Beatrice. Her large estate stood proudly on the wealthiest street in the capital, surrounded by elegant gardens and towering iron gates. Amelia knocked. Moments later, Aunt Beatrice appeared dressed in expensive silk. She barely looked at the girls before speaking.
What do you want?
We've nowhere to go. Please, let us stay until I find work. I'll do every chore in your house. My sisters only need somewhere safe to sleep.
I see.
Beatrice folded her arms. Your mother chose a poor servant. That isn't my responsibility. Please. I said no. The heavy gates closed. Lily lowered her head. Rose began crying softly. Amelia took both sisters by the hand and continued walking. Darkness slowly covered the streets. One inn after another refused them.
"For 3 young ladies, I might have 1 room.
Thank you.
You can have it after you spend the night with me."
No.
"Then get out!"
The smile vanished from his face. "Then get out." He motioned toward his workers. The men shoved the sisters back into the muddy street, slamming the wooden doors behind them. Rain began falling. That night they found shelter beneath the small awning of a closed bakery. Rose fell asleep shivering. Lily quietly cried beside her. Amelia remained awake until dawn, remembering her father's countless years serving the palace. If father gave his life to that palace, perhaps someone inside will remember him. As the first rays of sunlight reached the city, Amelia led her sisters towards the servants' entrance. The guards laughed when she explained why she had come. "There are no jobs. Go somewhere else." One even sneered, "Your father served the palace. The palace doesn't owe his family anything."
Amelia turned to leave. Then an elderly palace maid carrying folded linens suddenly stopped. She stared at Amelia in disbelief. Thomas's daughter? It was Margaret. Without hesitation, Margaret hurried to the head housekeeper and pleaded with tears in her eyes. After several long minutes, the head housekeeper finally sighed. There is one position. No one keeps it for long. The work is the hardest in the palace. The pay is poor. You'll scrub marble corridors, carry water, clean fireplaces, and work from before sunrise until after dark. Amelia never asked how much she would earn. She simply looked at Lily and Rose, then nodded. I accept. The head housekeeper handed her a faded servant's apron. Amelia held it tightly against her chest, never imagining she had just traded away her own future so her sisters could have one.
The next morning, while the city was still wrapped in darkness, Amelia tied the faded servant's apron around her waist and followed the head housekeeper through the endless corridors of the royal palace. Oil lamps flickered against polished stone walls, casting long shadows across portraits of kings and queens who had never known hunger or hardship. The palace looked magnificent to visitors, but behind its glittering halls was another world where servants labored in silence to keep that beauty alive. The head housekeeper stopped beside a large wooden cupboard filled with cleaning brushes, buckets, coarse cloths, soap, and heavy copper pails.
This corridor must shine before sunrise. The fireplaces in the east wing must be cleaned before breakfast is served. The servants' quarters are your responsibility, and every staircase leading to the royal chambers must remain spotless.
If anything is neglected, you will answer to me. Amelia nodded quietly. She had never worked such demanding labor before, yet she never complained. Before dawn broke each morning, she hauled heavy buckets of water from the palace wells, her shoulders aching under their weight. She scrubbed long stretches of white marble until they reflected the chandeliers overhead like mirrors. She knelt for hours cleaning soot from grand fireplaces, washed muddy footprints from servant passages, polished brass railings, and carried baskets overflowing with dirty linens to the palace laundry. By the time noble families gathered for breakfast around tables covered with roasted meats, fresh fruit, buttery pastries, cheeses, and warm loaves of bread, Amelia had already been working for several hours. She rarely finished before the moon appeared over the palace towers. The small room assigned to her was hardly larger than a storage closet. A narrow wooden bed stood against one wall, beside a tiny window overlooking the servants' courtyard. Her belongings fit inside a single worn trunk. The room was cold during winter and unbearably warm during summer, but Amelia never thought about comfort. Every payday she carefully counted the small pouch of coins she had earned. She kept only enough to buy coarse bread, a little oatmeal, and occasionally potatoes or onions. Everything else went to Lily and Rose. When food became too expensive, Amelia quietly skipped supper. If the palace kitchen served leftover vegetable soup, she carried a small portion back to her room and pretended it was enough. Whenever her sisters asked if she had eaten well, Amelia always smiled. The palace cooks make far too much food, she would joke. It was never true. Months passed. Her servants' dresses grew thin from constant washing. Instead of buying new clothing, Amelia patched every tear with scraps of fabric collected from discarded linens. The elbows, sleeves, and hems carried different shades of cloth, stitched together by careful hands until the garments barely resembled their original form. The palace offered extra wages to servants willing to clean banquet halls after midnight following royal celebrations. Most avoided those exhausting shifts. Amelia volunteered every time. She often worked until her legs trembled from exhaustion, knowing a few extra coins could pay for another month of her sister's education. One evening, she opened the small wooden box that held the last precious reminders of her parents. Inside rested Eleanor's silver necklace. Beside it lay Thomas's old pocket watch, its hands forever frozen at the hour of the terrible accident. Amelia held both treasures for a long time before quietly walking to a jeweler. The money they brought paid another year's tuition. Later, she sold the remaining family possessions one by one until nothing remained except memories. Not once did she regret the decision.
She believed Lily and Rose deserved opportunities their parents had never been able to afford. The Royal Ladies' Academy stood on a hill overlooking the capital, surrounded by elegant gardens, towering oak trees, and stone buildings covered with climbing ivy. Daughters of wealthy merchants, noble families, and respected officials studied there, learning literature, mathematics, history, music, languages, etiquette, and the fine arts. Amelia felt proud every time she passed through the academy gates, carrying another tuition payment. Whenever the students were granted holiday leave, she walked across the city carrying a small basket filled with homemade bread, meat pies when she could afford them, fresh apples, and jars of strawberry preserves prepared by palace cooks who secretly admired her kindness. She never arrived empty-handed. The moment Lily and Rose spotted her waiting outside the academy entrance, they rushed towards her with bright smiles. "Amelia!" They threw their arms around her. Rose kissed her cheek. Lily laughed as she hugged her tightly. "We missed you so much." The three sisters would sit beneath the shade of an old oak tree while Amelia unpacked their meal. They talked for hours about lessons, teachers, new friends, and dreams for the future. One afternoon, Lily gently took Amelia's hands and noticed the fresh blisters covering her palms.
You work too hard. When we graduate, everything will change. We'll take care of you. You'll never have to work another day. We promise.
Amelia believed every word. She never told them about the dream hidden quietly inside her own heart. Whenever she repaired torn uniforms or stitched worn aprons for other servants, she imagined creating beautiful gowns that noble ladies would proudly wear. She dreamed of becoming a skilled seamstress whose designs would be admired across the kingdom. But dreams cost money, money her sisters needed far more than she did. So Amelia folded that dream away like an unfinished piece of fabric and buried it deep inside her heart, convincing herself that seeing Lily and Rose succeed was enough. Years slipped quietly by. The girls she had sacrificed everything to raise slowly became elegant young women, welcomed into circles Amelia could never enter. At first, the changes were almost impossible to notice. Then, little by little, Amelia began seeing small moments she desperately tried to convince herself meant nothing at all.
The passing years rewarded every sacrifice Amelia had made. Lily and Rose no longer looked like frightened girls who had once slept beneath a bakery awning. The education Amelia had fought so hard to provide transformed them into refined young ladies. Their posture became graceful, their speech elegant, and their confidence grew with every passing season. Every payday, Amelia still placed nearly every coin she earned into envelopes addressed to the Royal Ladies' Academy. She never missed a tuition payment, never questioned another expense, and never complained when palace prices rose while her wages remained the same. Watching her sisters flourish was enough to convince herself every blister, every sleepless night, and every empty stomach had been worthwhile. At first, nothing seemed different. Whenever Amelia visited the academy, Lily and Rose still greeted her warmly. They shared tea beneath the old oak tree, laughed over stories from their lessons, and thanked Amelia for every sacrifice she had made. But as the months turned into years, small changes quietly found their way into those meetings. One autumn afternoon, Amelia arrived wearing the same carefully patched servant's dress she always wore on her days off. Her basket held warm meat pies, fresh pears, and honey cakes she had baked in the palace kitchens before sunrise. Lily smiled when she saw her, yet before running over, she hesitated. Her eyes wandered toward a nearby group of noble students. Only then did she approach. They embraced as usual, but something felt different. While they shared lunch, Lily gently cleared her throat. "Amelia?" "Yes?" "Would you mind wearing something else the next time you visit?" Amelia looked down at her faded uniform. "This?" Lily forced a smile. "The other girls keep asking why my sister wears a palace maid's uniform. It makes things awkward." Before Amelia could answer, Rose nodded in agreement. "Perhaps a simple dress would be better. You don't have to
Could you
wear your
possibly
work
wear
clothes
something
here.
else for the gathering?
For a brief second,
Of
Amelia's
course.
smile faded. Then she
That would
quickly
be
recovered.
wonderful.
Of course.
I
I'll
will do
try.
my best.
She never mentioned that she owned no other dress. The only clothing she had outside her servant's uniform had long ago been sold to help pay their school fees. Instead, she changed the subject and asked about their studies. Neither sister noticed the sadness hidden behind her smile. The following months brought even greater success. Lily's remarkable intelligence earned admiration from professors throughout the academy. She excelled in literature, history, languages, and court etiquette. During debates, she spoke with confidence that impressed visiting nobles, and her graceful manners quickly became the talk of the capital's social circles. Invitations soon followed. Tea gatherings, charity luncheons, music recitals, garden parties hosted by influential families. For the first time in her life, Lily found herself surrounded by people who had never known poverty. Rose accompanied her to many of these events. Although naturally quieter, she adapted quickly, carefully observing how noble ladies dressed, spoke, and behaved. She slowly began copying them. One autumn afternoon, Amelia arrived unexpectedly to surprise her sisters with freshly baked apple tarts. As she entered the gardens of the academy, Lily saw speaking with several daughters of powerful noble families. One young lady smiled politely. "Lady Lily," she asked, "who is that woman?" Lily glanced toward Amelia. For the smallest moment, uncertainty crossed her face. Then she
Oh,
answered
she's
softly,
someone who helped raise
"Oh,
us.
she's
My
someone who
sister.
helped raise us."
Hello, everyone.
The words reached Amelia before anyone noticed she had arrived. She stopped walking. Her hands tightened around the basket. Someone who helped raise us. Not my sister. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before Amelia forced herself to smile and continued walking towards them as though she had heard nothing. She greeted everyone warmly, shared the pastries, laughed when the others laughed. No one noticed the quiet pain hidden behind her gentle eyes. She told herself Lily had probably not meant any harm. Deep inside, she wanted to believe it. Life inside the palace remained just as demanding. Amelia's hands grew rougher. Her shoulders ached constantly. Yet she felt lighter each time news of her sister's achievements reached the servants' quarters. Then another piece of wonderful news spread throughout the kingdom. Duke Adrian Blackwood had visited the Royal Ladies' Academy as patron of its annual academic exhibition. Among dozens of graduates, one young woman had captured his attention. Lily. He admired not only her intelligence, but also the kindness she appeared to show others, her confidence, and the dignity with which she carried herself. Invitations soon followed. Tea gatherings, charity luncheons, music recitals. Before long, the capital quietly began whispering that Duke Adrian had found the woman he intended to marry. Around the same time, Rose accepted a prestigious appointment as companion to one of the kingdom's most respected duchesses. Amelia could hardly contain her happiness. Every prayer she had whispered during lonely nights seemed to have been answered. Neither sister would ever know the hardships she had endured. They had escaped the life she once feared would consume them. One evening, while every servant slept after an exhausting banquet, Amelia remained awake beside the small candle in her room. Spread across her narrow bed lay delicate white silk she had bought little by little over many months. With careful hands, she stitched every seam herself. Tiny pearls decorated the sleeves. Fine embroidery adorned the neckline. Every stitch carried a silent blessing for Lily's future. She never intended to tell anyone she had made it. Seeing Lily wear it would be enough. As dawn approached, Amelia carefully folded the unfinished gown into a wooden chest before hurrying back to another day of scrubbing palace floors. A few mornings later, while polishing silver trays in the servants' kitchen, two palace maids entered the room, chatting excitedly. "Have you heard? The entire capital is preparing for Lady Lily Ashcroft's engagement celebration next week." Another maid laughed. "They say every important noble family has received an invitation." Amelia stopped polishing. Her smile slowly disappeared. She had heard nothing about any celebration, and no invitation had ever arrived. Amelia stood motionless for only a few seconds after hearing the palace maids discussing Lady Lily Ashcroft's engagement celebration. Surely there had been some mistake. Perhaps the invitation had been delayed. Perhaps Lily had planned to surprise her. She quickly wiped her hands on her faded servant's apron and hurried toward the head housekeeper. "Please, may I leave early today?" she asked politely. The older woman noticed the anxiety in Amelia's eyes. "You've never asked before." "My sister, she's celebrating her engagement today." The head housekeeper smiled kindly. "Go, you've earned it." Amelia thanked her repeatedly before rushing to her tiny room. She opened the old wooden chest where Lily's beautiful silk gown rested neatly folded. Every pearl had been sewn on by hand. Every stitch had been placed with love after long nights spent working by candlelight. She carefully wrapped the gown inside white linen and carried it against her chest. There wasn't enough time to change clothes. Her servant's dress was clean, but worn from years of use. The cuffs had been patched several times, and the hem showed signs of countless repairs. Amelia glanced at herself in the cracked mirror before quietly whispering, "It doesn't matter. I'm her sister." Then she ran. She hurried through crowded market streets filled with flower vendors, fruit sellers, carriage traffic, and merchants calling out the day's bargains. The afternoon sun hung low over the capital as she crossed bridges, climbed stone stairways, and passed elegant homes decorated with colorful banners celebrating the season. By the time she reached Blackwood Manor, her breathing had become uneven. The estate looked magnificent. Fresh roses decorated the entrance. Crystal lanterns hung from ancient oak trees. Long tables overflowed with roasted pheasant, glazed ham, fresh bread, delicate pastries, imported cheeses, fruit tarts, and sparkling crystal goblets filled with expensive wine. Members of noble families filled the beautifully decorated gardens. Judges, generals, wealthy merchants, ladies dressed in elegant silk gowns, gentlemen wearing embroidered tailcoats, musicians performed softly beside a marble fountain, while servants carried silver trays through the gathering. Amelia smiled. She had never seen Lily's dreams come so beautifully to life. Holding the wrapped gown carefully, she stepped through the entrance. A few guests glanced curiously at the palace servant walking among them, but before anyone could stop her, Amelia spotted Lily standing beside Duke Adrian Blackwood under a floral arch. She looked radiant. Amelia's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Lily," she called gently. The music continued playing. Several nearby guests turned toward the unfamiliar voice. Lily slowly looked around. The moment her eyes met Amelia's, the smile disappeared from her face. Her entire body stiffened. For several long seconds, neither sister moved. Amelia approached with hopeful eyes. "I only found out today. I came as quickly as I could. I made something for you." She lifted the carefully wrapped package. Before Amelia could say another word, one of the noblewomen standing beside Lily frowned. "Lady Lily, who is this woman?" The question echoed through the suddenly quiet gathering. Every conversation stopped. Dozens of curious faces turned toward Lily. Amelia waited patiently. She expected to hear the words she had imagined for years. "My sister." Instead, Lily looked directly into Amelia's eyes, then calmly answered, "I don't know her." The words seemed to steal every sound from the garden. Amelia blinked slowly. Surely she had misunderstood. "Lily, it's me." Another guest looked confused. "If she is not known to you, how did she enter the celebration?" Someone else whispered, "She appears to be one of the palace servants." Amelia looked desperately toward Rose. The youngest sister stood only a few steps away. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, Amelia hoped Rose would laugh, explain everything, and embrace her. Instead, Rose lowered her head. She remained completely silent. That silence hurt even more than Lily's words. Amelia's fingers slowly loosened around the carefully wrapped package she had spent months sewing. The package slipped slightly against her arm. "I only wanted to congratulate you," she whispered. No one answered. Lily's expression remained cold.
2 household guards quietly approached. One bowed respectfully. "My lady, would you like us to escort this woman outside?" Without taking her eyes off Amelia, Lily gave a small nod. "Please do." The guards gently took Amelia by the arms. She offered no resistance. Her feet barely seemed to carry her as they slowly guided her through rows of silent guests. Whispers followed behind her. Some pitied her, others simply watched. None of them knew who she truly was. As Amelia reached the entrance gates, she stopped for one final moment. She turned toward the celebration. Lily stood smiling politely beside Duke Adrian once more, speaking with guests as though nothing unusual had happened. Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat. Then, so quietly that only one person nearby heard her, she whispered, "Congratulations, little sister."
Congratulations, little sister.
She lowered her head and walked away without looking back. Standing only a short distance away, Duke Adrian Blackwood remained frozen. His eyes followed Amelia until she disappeared beyond the gates. One sentence continued echoing inside his mind, "Little sister." He glanced toward Lily, then toward the palace maid walking away with quiet dignity, despite the tears running down her face. Nothing about the scene made sense. A servant had addressed Lady Lily with the affection only family could share, yet Lady Lily had claimed never to have seen her before. For the rest of the celebration, Adrian heard every speech, every toast, and every word spoken around him, but his thoughts remained fixed on one haunting question that refused to leave his mind. Why would a palace maid call Lady Lily little sister?
Duke Adrian Blackwood remained unusually quiet long after the graduation celebration ended. While musicians packed away their instruments and guests praised Lily Lanny's elegance during the carriage ride home, his thoughts kept returning to the tearful palace maid who had whispered, "Congratulations, little sister." The words refused to leave him. Something about them had sounded painfully genuine. Lily had claimed never to have seen the woman before, yet the grief in the servant's voice could not be faked. The following morning, Adrian quietly ordered his carriage to the royal palace. Instead of announcing his visit, he entered through the servants' courtyard, where dozens of maids hurried between kitchens, laundries, and storage rooms carrying baskets of fresh vegetables, folded linens, and buckets of water. He asked only one question. "Who is the palace maid called Amelia?" The servants exchanged surprised glances. Before anyone answered, an elderly woman stepped forward. It was Margaret. "I know Amelia, Your Grace." Adrian noticed the respect in the old woman's voice. He invited her into a quiet office away from curious ears. Margaret slowly told him everything. She spoke of Thomas Ashcroft, the palace stablemaster who had given his life saving the young prince many years earlier. She described his honesty, his loyalty, and the heartbreaking months that followed his death. Then she spoke of Amelia's promise to her dying mother, and how a frightened young woman had arrived at the palace gates with 2 younger sisters after being rejected by everyone else. "She never once complained," Margaret said softly. "I've worked beside her for 15 years. I've never known anyone kinder." Adrian listened without interrupting. When Margaret finished, he sought out the head housekeeper. The older woman confirmed every word. She unlocked an old cabinet filled with employment ledgers. Dust rose from the shelves as she carefully placed thick payroll books on the desk. Each page recorded Amelia's wages over the past 15 years. Adrian noticed something unusual. Every payday, Amelia withdrew almost nothing for herself. The head housekeeper quietly explained. She always sent nearly everything to her sisters. Curious, Adrian continued searching. He visited the Royal Ladies' Academy. The Academy registrar opened records showing every tuition payment made for Lily and Rose. Every receipt carried the same name, Amelia Ashcroft. Teachers remembered her well. One elderly professor smiled sadly. "She often waited outside our gates for hours. She never interrupted lessons. She only wanted to see her sisters smile." Adrian left the academy and continued asking questions throughout the capital. A baker remembered Amelia buying flour late at night after exhausting shifts because she wanted to bake bread for the girls on holidays. A bookseller recalled giving her small discounts after learning she worked extra hours just to buy textbooks. A fabric merchant remembered Amelia carefully purchasing tiny pieces of cloth instead of entire rolls because she could only afford a little at a time. Everyone told the same story. Every sacrifice, every hardship, every dream, all for Lily and Rose. Finally, Adrian visited the elderly jeweler who once purchased Thomas's watch and Eleanor's silver necklace. The old man immediately remembered Amelia. I cried while handing them to him. I asked whether she was certain. She said her sister's education mattered more than family treasures. By evening, Adrian felt as though he had lived Amelia's entire life through the memories of strangers. Then Margaret quietly revealed one final truth. There was something Amelia wanted more than anything. Adrian looked up. What was it? She dreamed of becoming a seamstress. Margaret smiled sadly. She could repair almost anything with a needle. The other maids always admired her stitching. But she never spent a single coin on herself. Every penny went to Lily and Rose. Adrian lowered his eyes. For 15 years, Amelia had buried her own future so her sisters could build theirs. Without Amelia, there would have been no education, no academy, no noble invitations, no admiration, no engagement. Lily had built her entire life upon sacrifices she no longer wished to acknowledge. While Adrian uncovered the truth, Amelia slowly walked home after another exhausting day at the palace. The small cottage felt strangely quiet. She had barely lit the fireplace when Lily and Rose arrived together. Neither greeted her. Amelia looked at both sisters with tired eyes.
Where did I fail? I gave up everything for you both. Every sacrifice, every dream, I laid it down. Amelia, we never asked for that. I never meant to hurt you.
Tired eyes. I've been asking myself all day where I failed. Silence filled the room. She spoke calmly, without anger. I never expected riches. I never asked you to repay me. I only hoped I would always remain your sister. She glanced toward Lily. I sold Mother's necklace, Father's watch. I worked until I couldn't feel my hands. I went hungry so both of you could eat. I gave up everything because I loved you. For a moment, Rose's eyes filled with guilt. Before she could speak, Lily's patience snapped.
We never asked you to sacrifice! We never asked you to sacrifice! You only did your duty. You were the eldest. You act as though we owe you our entire lives.
Amelia remained silent. Lily grabbed her traveling bag. I'm tired of you acting like a saint. I'm done living under your shadow. She walked toward the door. Without looking back, she left the cottage. Rose stood frozen. Tears gathered in her eyes, but fear kept her rooted in place. Finally, she whispered, I'll be leaving soon too. Then she quietly walked away. Darkness settled over the little cottage. 3 beds stood inside the room. Only one would be slept in that night. Amelia folded the blanket she had always prepared for Lily, then Rose's. She placed both neatly at the foot of their empty beds before sitting alone beside the dying fire. Outside, the kingdom continued celebrating Lady Lily's engagement. Inside that tiny home, the woman who had given everything to her family quietly faced the painful truth that she had lost them both. Only a few days remained before the grand engagement banquet, and somewhere inside Blackwood Manor, Duke Adrian had already made a decision that would shock the entire kingdom.
The day of the royal engagement banquet arrived beneath clear blue skies, and by late afternoon the capital buzzed with excitement. Elegant carriages lined the wide avenue leading to Blackwood Manor, their polished wheels gleaming in the sunlight. Footmen in immaculate uniforms opened carriage doors for dukes, duchesses, judges, military officers, wealthy merchants, and members of the royal court. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom, while long tables displayed roasted venison, glazed duck, buttered vegetables, fresh oysters, delicate pastries, sugared fruits, and towering wedding cakes decorated with white roses. Musicians filled the hall with soft classical melodies as noble guests exchanged congratulations. At precisely 7 o'clock, the royal family entered. Everyone stood. The king acknowledged the gathering with a dignified nod, while the queen smiled warmly toward Duke Adrian Blackwood and Lady Lily Ashcroft. Lily looked breathtaking in the elegant gown Amelia had secretly sewn with her own hands. Every pearl reflected the candlelight, every stitch perfectly hidden beneath layers of shimmering silk. She never knew whose hands had created it. Rose stood proudly among the attendants, now dressed in the refined uniform of a noble duchess's companion. Looking around the magnificent hall, both sisters believed every sacrifice had finally led them to this moment. When the orchestra finished playing, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the raised platform. "My lords and ladies," he announced with a smile, "we gather tonight to celebrate the union of two respected families." Polite applause filled the ballroom. The master of ceremonies turned toward Adrian. "Your Grace, if you would kindly—" "One moment." Adrian's calm voice interrupted him. The applause faded. Guests exchanged puzzled glances as Adrian slowly stepped forward. His expression carried none of the happiness expected from a man announcing his engagement. Instead, he faced the gathering with unusual seriousness. "There is something every person in this room deserves to know before this engagement proceeds." Lily's smile faltered. She looked at Adrian, confused. He continued, "Several days ago, I witnessed a palace maid publicly humiliated and turned away from Lady Lily's graduation celebration." Silence spread through the ballroom. "I was told she was a stranger. I have since discovered that was a lie." Lily's face slowly lost its color. Adrian calmly unfolded several papers. "They are payroll records from the royal palace." He held them up. "For 15 years, Amelia Ashcroft worked the hardest servant's position in the kingdom." He placed the documents on the table before lifting another bundle. "These are tuition records from the Royal Ladies' Academy. Every payment was made by the same woman." Another document followed. Statements from teachers, shopkeepers, servants, the head housekeeper, and the palace maid who watched her sacrifice everything. Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward Lily. Adrian's voice remained steady. "Lady Lily Ashcroft did not reach this position alone. The woman she publicly denied sold her family's belongings, worked before sunrise until after midnight, went hungry, gave away nearly every coin she earned, and abandoned her own dream so her sisters could have a future." No one moved. The room had become completely silent. Adrian looked directly at Lily. "You told everyone you didn't know her. You denied the woman who gave you your education, your opportunities, and the life you enjoy today." Lily opened her mouth. No words came. Adrian finally asked the question that echoed through the grand hall. If she could abandon the woman who gave her life, how could she ever honor this family? No one answered. Not the king, not the queen, not the assembled nobles. Only silence remained. After several long moments, Adrian slowly removed the engagement ring from his pocket. He placed it gently upon the table. "I cannot marry a woman capable of such betrayal. This engagement is over." Gasps swept through the ballroom. Lily stumbled backward. "This isn't fair," she whispered desperately. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Adrian replied quietly. "You forgot the person who never forgot you." Without another word, he walked away. One by one, conversations resumed in hushed whispers. Guests who had eagerly congratulated Lily moments earlier quietly distanced themselves. Several noble ladies turned away as she approached. Military officers bowed politely before leaving the ballroom altogether. The Duchess employing Rose later informed her that someone entrusted with representing a noble household must possess unquestionable character. By the following morning, Rose no longer held her prestigious position. Within days, invitations stopped arriving. Doors that had once opened eagerly now remained closed. The same society that had welcomed the sisters without question quietly abandoned them. That afternoon, Adrian traveled alone to the servants' quarters of the royal palace. He found Amelia exactly where Margaret had said she would be. She knelt on the marble floor, carefully polishing the grand staircase as though nothing in the world had changed. She looked up in surprise. "Your Grace." Adrian smiled gently. "You've spent 15 years making everyone else's dreams come true." He paused. "But no one has ever asked about yours." Amelia lowered her cloth. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to answer. Then she quietly admitted something she had hidden for years. "I always wanted to become a seamstress. I loved making dresses, but my sisters needed me more." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then a warm smile slowly appeared across his face. In that single moment, he made a promise that would change Amelia's future forever.
Adrian kept the promise he made to Amelia. Within a week, he had arranged for her admission into the Royal Academy of Dressmaking, the finest institution in the kingdom for tailoring, embroidery, and fashion design. Every tuition fee, every book, every piece of practice fabric, and every sewing tool was paid for before Amelia attended her first lesson. When the head housekeeper learned that Amelia would be leaving the palace, she embraced her with tears in her eyes. "You came here as a frightened girl," she whispered. "You leave as a woman every servant admires." Margaret cried openly as Amelia folded her servant's apron for the final time. For 15 years, that faded uniform had carried the weight of her sacrifices. Now, she laid it carefully inside a wooden chest before quietly closing the lid. She walked out of the servants' entrance where she had once begged for work. This time, she walked out with hope. Although Adrian had removed every financial burden from her shoulders, Amelia refused to waste the opportunity. She studied harder than every other student. While others returned home after classes, Amelia remained inside the academy workshops long after sunset, practicing delicate embroidery, learning advanced tailoring techniques, studying fabrics imported from distant kingdoms, and mastering every detail of dressmaking. Her instructors quickly realized they were teaching someone with extraordinary natural talent. One elderly instructor often smiled while watching Amelia work. "You weren't born to scrub palace floors," she once told her. "You were born to create beauty." After graduating with the highest honors, Adrian rented a small workshop for her near one of the busiest shopping streets in the capital. The building contained only a single fitting room, 2 sewing tables, and 1 display window. Amelia hung a simple wooden sign above the entrance: Ashcroft Dressmaking. During the first weeks, very few customers entered. Instead of becoming discouraged, Amelia spent her days creating elegant gowns and placing them inside the display window. Passers-by frequently stopped to admire the remarkable craftsmanship. Soon, one noble lady entered the shop. She ordered a gown. Another recommended Amelia to a friend, then another. Within months, appointments were fully booked. Her designs became known for their elegance, flawless stitching, and graceful simplicity. Demand soon exceeded what one small workshop could produce. Amelia hired skilled assistants, expanded into a larger building, and began importing the finest silks, French lace, Italian velvet, and rare embroidered fabrics from merchants across Europe. Years of discipline that had once been devoted to cleaning palace floors were now poured into perfecting every dress she created. Her name spread throughout the kingdom. Queens requested her designs. Princesses traveled to the capital to visit her showroom. Duchesses proudly wore gowns bearing the Ashcroft label during royal ceremonies. Before long, Amelia owned the largest fashion house in the kingdom. The frightened orphan, who once counted every coin, had become one of the wealthiest businesswomen in the country. Yet, success never changed her gentle heart. Far from the capital, another life was quietly falling apart. After the engagement ended, Aunt Beatrice's wealthy husband died unexpectedly following a brief illness. Because they had never had children together and nearly all of his estates legally belonged to his family, his relatives quickly claimed the mansion, businesses, and farmland. Within weeks, Beatrice found herself standing outside the same gates she had once closed on Amelia. Only this time, she was the one carrying a single worn suitcase. No carriage waited for her, no servants opened the doors. Friends who had once admired her wealth suddenly disappeared. With nowhere else to go, she travelled to the capital and stood nervously before Amelia's magnificent mansion. When the butler opened the door, Beatrice lowered her head in shame. I have nowhere left." Moments later, Amelia appeared. The older woman burst into tears. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have helped you. I was cruel. I've paid for it." The servants quietly watched, wondering how Amelia would respond.
Instead of anger, Amelia stepped forward and gently held her aunt's trembling hands. "I know what it feels like when every door is closed," she turned towards the butler. "Please prepare the guest room." Beatrice covered her face and sobbed. Mercy was the last thing she expected. Meanwhile, Lily and Rose watched their own lives collapse. Without noble invitations, Lily's reputation vanished almost overnight. No respectable family wished to associate with the woman who had publicly rejected the sister who sacrificed everything for her. Rose could not find another position. Their savings slowly disappeared. Jewelry was sold first, then expensive furniture, finally the house itself. With no other choice, they left the capital and settled in a small farming village where no one knew their names. For the first time in their lives, they woke before sunrise to fetch water from a distant well, chopped firewood before cooking simple meals, washed clothes by hand in cold streams, and worked long days simply to afford bread and vegetables. One evening, Rose stared silently at the blisters covering her hands. Tears filled her eyes. "So this," she whispered, "is what Amelia protected us from." Lily lowered her head. For the first time in years, she truly understood the price her sister had paid. 2 years quietly passed. One peaceful afternoon, as Amelia reviewed sketches inside her magnificent mansion after another successful season, her butler entered the drawing room with an uncertain expression. "My lady, there are 2 women at the front gate asking to see you. They say they're your sisters."
Amelia quietly closed the sketchbook resting on her desk. For a brief moment, she simply stared toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens surrounding her mansion. White roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, while neatly trimmed hedges framed the stone pathway leading to the front gate. She slowly stood. "I'll see them." The butler nodded and stepped aside. As Amelia walked through the entrance hall, memories returned with every step. 15 years earlier, she had stood outside another grand house, desperately begging someone to open a door for her. Today, someone else stood at hers. When the front doors opened, Amelia almost failed to recognize them. Lily and Rose no longer resembled the elegant young women who had once walked proudly through noble gatherings. Their dresses were faded from years of wear. The hems had been mended countless times. Their shoes were cracked. Their faces had grown thinner, their cheeks hollow, and the confidence that once filled their eyes had disappeared completely. For several seconds, none of them spoke. Then Lily suddenly fell to her knees. Rose followed immediately. Tears streamed freely down both their faces. "We're sorry," Lily whispered. The words trembled as they left her lips. "We've carried this guilt every single day." Rose covered her face with trembling hands. "We finally understand." Her voice broke into quiet sobs. "We thought we had earned everything ourselves. We never understood what you protected us from." Lily lifted her tear-filled eyes toward Amelia. "When we had servants, when food always appeared on the table, when our clothes were clean, when our books were paid for, we thought life was simply supposed to be that way." She lowered her head. "But after we lost everything, we finally lived the life you spent 15 years shielding us from." Rose nodded through her tears. "We know now what it means to wake before sunrise, to worry about buying bread, to choose between food and firewood, to work until your hands bleed. Every hardship we face now, you carried alone."
Neither sister attempted to justify what they had done. They blamed no one except themselves. Lily wiped away her tears. "The day you came to my graduation, I wasn't ashamed of you. I was ashamed that the nobles would know where I came from. I chose status over the person who loved me most. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Rose's shoulders shook as she cried. "We don't deserve your kindness, but if there's even the smallest place left in your heart, please forgive us." The servants standing nearby quietly lowered their eyes. Even the butler struggled to hide his emotions. Amelia looked at the two women kneeling before her. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she stepped forward. Gently, she reached down and helped Lily to her feet. Then rose. Her voice remained calm. "I forgave you long ago." Both sisters looked at her with hopeful eyes. For the first time since arriving, a faint smile appeared on Lily's face. She believed everything could finally return to the way it once had been. Amelia gently shook her head. "But forgiveness doesn't erase the choices you made." The smile slowly disappeared. "You stopped being my family the day you chose status over love." Neither sister argued. They knew she was right. "I don't hate you. I never will. But some doors cannot be reopened once they've been closed." She signaled for the butler. He returned carrying 2 small leather pouches filled with gold coins. Amelia placed one into each sister's hands. "This is enough to buy land or open a small business in your village. Build an honest life, work hard, and never look down on another person again." Fresh tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. "You've given us more kindness than we deserve." Rose quietly nodded. "We'll spend the rest of our lives trying to become better people." Neither sister asked to stay. Deep inside, they understood they had already lost the greatest gift life had ever given them. They embraced Amelia one final time, then slowly walked toward the front gate. Neither looked back. Not because they no longer loved her, but because turning around would only remind them of everything their pride had cost them. Amelia remained standing in the garden long after they disappeared beyond the trees. A few moments later, Adrian quietly joined her. He stood beside her without speaking. The evening sun painted the gardens with shades of gold as birds settled among the flowering hedges. Finally, Adrian smiled. "I've met queens who ruled kingdoms. I've met noblewomen admired across Europe, but I've never met anyone with a heart like yours." Amelia looked toward the horizon. "I thought forgiving them would hurt less. It still does." Adrian nodded gently. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let bitterness become your future." Amelia smiled softly. For the first time in many years, her future no longer belonged to her past. Together they turned and walked back toward the mansion that stood as a testament not to wealth alone, but to perseverance, sacrifice, and grace. Some people lose their wealth and discover poverty. Others lose the people who loved them and spend the rest of their lives realizing that no amount of status can ever replace a faithful heart.